Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sotheby, and I'm the CEO of the Asia Society India Center. I'm delighted to see members, patrons, and friends from across the world join us this afternoon. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Asia Society is a leading educational organization dedicated to building awareness about art, business, technology, and policy from across Asia on a global stage. Through our cultural programs, we are committed to recognizing the diversity of contemporary art, film, and regional artistic traditions from Asia. The inaugural Asia Society Triennial is currently on view at the Asia Society Museum in New York City. The first edition of the Triennial, titled We Do Not Dream Alone, is composed of a multi-venue exhibition as well as online artist talks, forums, and performances. In India, our annual Asia Arts Game Changer Awards is one of our signature programs, bringing together art collectors, artists, gallerists, dignitaries from the art world, and Asia Society trustees and patrons. The awards pay tribute to artists and art professionals who've made a significant contribution to the development of modern and contemporary art in Asia, and who inspire a deeper empathy and understanding of the world through their work. This year, the Asia Arts Game Changer Awards India will be hosted virtually on May 20th, 2021. Do follow our website and social media handles to know more about the awards and other programs in the arts. The discussion this afternoon is the first of a three-part series of virtual conversations developed in partnership with Bloomberg Philanthropies. The series, called Art Plus, looks at new and unique developments within the field of contemporary art and culture across Asia. Art Plus Investment is the first of this series. In the wake of UBS's latest art market report for 2021, which released 2 days ago, the conversation will focus on some relevant questions that the art world is grappling with both in Asia and around the world. We've got a great panel together to address these themes. Our moderator for the session, Rosalind Chin, will introduce you to them. Rosalind is a reporter for Bloomberg Television. Based in Hong Kong, she provides in-depth reports on business and current affairs across the Asia-Pacific region. She's reported from the front lines of major events across the region, including China's National People's Congress meetings, Hong Kong's pro-democracy Occupy demonstrations, and Art Basel Hong Kong. An accomplished field producer, Rosalind oversaw Bloomberg Television's exclusive interview with Indonesian President Joko Widodo in Medan, coverage of Malaysian elections, and World Economic Forum in Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand, and China. She was also a series producer of Bloomberg's talk show series, High Flyers. Prior to Bloomberg Television, Rosalind held various roles with CNN, Reuters, and the BBC World Service. And now for a bit of housekeeping. For all those on Zoom, please do post your questions in the Q&A box and your comments on the chat box. And for audiences joining us on Facebook, please drop them in the comments section. I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in. Keep following the Asia Society on YouTube and Facebook, and on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn for updates on upcoming events from across our 14 global centers. Once again, our heartfelt gratitude to Bloomberg Philanthropies for supporting our endeavors in the arts. And with that, Rosalind, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ishrat Kanga, CEO of the Asia Society India Center. Now, I would like to welcome everybody to this conversation on art and investment, hosted by Asia Society India Center in partnership with Bloomberg. I'm Rosalind Chin from Bloomberg Television, and I'm looking forward to a lively conversation with our expert panel today. I'm joined by a great panel of speakers. We've got Ishrat Kanga, Deputy Director, Specialist Head of Sales at Sotheby London, Arvind Vijaymohan, CEO of Artery India in Delhi, and Zain Masud, the art advisor and strategist, currently based in Dubai. Just to tell you a little bit more about them, Ishrat is responsible for sourcing and selling property for the annual London and New York Modern and Contemporary South Asian Art Auctions, along with producing the catalogue for the sales. She also works with new and emerging collectors worldwide. Arvind is CEO of Artery India, an art market intelligence and asset advisory firm. He advises clients on acquisitions of Indian art assets. And Zain is based in Dubai, as I mentioned, and she's an independent art advisor. She consults with cultural organizations on their collections, and private individuals and foundations also in building and curating collections of contemporary art. So I just want to mention that you can, of course, post questions in the chat box, and I'll be posting some of those to the panelists at the end of this session. So, of course, we all know that 2020 was a very challenging year for everybody, one way or another. The Art Basel and UBS Global Art Market Report for 2021 was released just a few days ago, and it noted that global sales were down 22% last year, but that actually is not as steep as some had expected. And I would like to ask our panelists today what their experience of the art market was last year, given the challenges that many faced in that situation. Can I start first with Ishrat? What have you seen in the last year or so? And also, I know that you've recently had some sales in New York, and I'd like to know how they've been going.
Thank you, Ross. So speaking about the South Asian art market specifically, we actually have a very, very strong market and demand right now for this type of art. So just to give you some perspective, the last auction that Sotheby's had before the pandemic hit was actually the South Asian art auction. The office closed down that very same day. And the sale total was $4.8 million, which was actually the highest total we've ever had in 3 years. But it was still on the cusp of the pandemic. Then we had another auction in London in September, well into the pandemic, and the sale total was $6.1 million. So we actually made more money than March. And we just had an auction 2 days ago, and it totaled $7.1 million. So you've seen 3 consecutive auctions in this one pandemic year, and every auction has been achieving more than the last. So I thought that's an interesting statistic and a way to sort of signal the strength of the market.
That's very interesting. So despite the fact that people couldn't travel and the traditional areas, the avenues of buying art were somewhat blocked because of the inability to travel, still art sales were going up, which indicates that there is definitely a strong demand there for Sotheby's products and their collections right now. I just want to ask Arvind what his experience has been for this year.
Rosalind, let me just start by saying I'm very privileged to be part of this panel. My perspective as someone who's been directing an art intelligence firm, which keeps a tab on the movement of the market, has been fascinating, to put it mildly. If you consider what happened in the previous, economic slump in 2008 and 9, the market went from an all-time high at that point of $108 million. It dropped to $38.7 million in 2009. I'm referring to auction sales, which are taking into account every single contemporary and modern Indian artwork sold globally. In the current context, between 2019 and 2020, we saw the numbers shift from 75.6 million in 2019 to actually upwards of 103.6 million. So we actually saw the market grow. And to me, that is fascinating because it shows a very eager community of ardent collectors who are on the lookout for assets that would make their way in times of distress. Whenever markets crumple, whenever you see the economies collapse, you'll see a number of distressed assets come forward. And we have seen some spectacular works play through in 2020. In fact, 2020 was a breakthrough year from the perspective of record breaks. We had 96 new records that were set for pre-modern, contemporary, and modern artists across the board. So a resounding year, really.
Zain, are you also seeing a similar growth and strength in the art markets that you've been working in last year?
I mean, of course, life has changed dramatically for all of us, and our access to art has changed dramatically. So for many of us in the art world, also working across regions, life was really defined by getting on a flight and going and seeing work in person. I'm really lucky that where I am in Dubai, we've opened up. We do have access to galleries once again. There will be an art fair here in just a short 10 days. But I mean, it's been very heartening that whilst a lot of the strategic work that's being done with institutions has quietened, work with collectors and work with individuals who are still looking to acquire art has been really quite buoyant. People are at home, people are looking at their walls, people have time to think, and to read, and to educate themselves. And whilst unfortunately so much of the world has seen a flux in economics, people haven't been spending on the things they used to spend on before. And they're thinking about how to invest soundly in art. So it's been a positive and heartening byproduct of the situation, at least in my work. I think this is a very fragile region that has a younger market than elsewhere and still needs a lot of thinking and a lot of support.
Yes, that's a good point. I think we all will have experienced casualties in the art markets, because although there has been growth, there will be some perhaps smaller galleries and smaller players who may not have been able to survive. Or have you seen any ways in which people have started working together to try and get through this difficult period when they may have been impacted by the change in the way people are buying art?
Yes, so Ross, in April of 2020, Sotheby's actually launched a gallery network. So they gave a platform to American galleries to be able to buy now and transact very quickly. And so a lot of the galleries, just by nature of them being a very in-person business, suddenly just went straight to digital using Sotheby's platform, posting all the artworks that were available for sale right now. And we turned that around in about a month after the doors closed.
And that was that you saw a strong uptake of that?
Yes. And, in general, the major consequence for auction houses was the fact that we had fewer auction sales, but we had more private sales. So we actually had 50% more private sales last year than the year before.
Arvind, what has your experience been on this in terms of smaller galleries and players collaborating together, perhaps, to form a network?
Rosalind, the way I look at it is the way to true growth is when an ecosystem is enriched by people coming together, holding hands and sort of creating something that genuinely contributes immense value. If you look at the existing, let's go into pre-pandemic play. What we had by way of art fairs was a collaborative effort where a number of, traditional players would come under one roof. And that would make for an optimum, utilization of a buyer's time. In this moment, what we've seen is we've seen several galleries within the Indian ecosystem come together. In fact, just about a fortnight back, we had 4 galleries from different parts of the country host a spectacular opening in Delhi. One was from Calcutta, one was from Bombay, and 2 were from Delhi itself. And that sort of almost created a euphoric moment where everyone found reason to come out and celebrate and raise a little cheer. That has to be the template. I think whether the pandemic stays or not, that's anybody's guess. But I think the way forward really is for everyone to hold hands, understand how the fraternity can build, genuine value towards growth by working together. What Ishrat mentioned, we've had a similar sort of setup with an auction house in India called Saffron Art, doing the same, and that has resulted in sales. So there is tremendous opportunity, and I think this year past has given us all a lot of time to sit, think, analyze, and see how we can work collectively for the betterment of this industry.
So I wanted to ask, how do we keep the momentum going? How do you keep the momentum going in a more considered way to avoid, for example, some of the froth that was seen like 10, 12 years ago, where the market grew a lot, but then it wasn't able to sustain that growth?
Zain, would you like to take that?
Arvind, or yes, anyone would like to answer that question?
I actually had a little bit more to add on the initiatives that have brought people together, particularly in the part of the world that we're thinking about and discussing today. There have been initiatives like South-South, generated by 50 galleries across Latin America, South Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Others between India and where I am here in the UAE, called In Touch. And it's been incredibly heartening, and it's a really efficient way to bring information. I think we haven't yet touched on the deluge of noise and information that are being brought to the attention of collectors and clients now within the art world. And it's really helped to sift through and bring to the attention of these people quality work through a host of galleries together. But if you could repeat your question about the froth that you
It was how can we keep the growth and momentum growing in the market, but in a more considered way? So there was a bit of froth we saw 10, 12 years ago in the market. It grew quite quickly, and then the global financial crisis happened, and then we saw the art market sort of sink a bit. And then now it's been, especially in contemporary art, trying to build itself back, especially in the South Asian market. How do we, in some ways, build the growth, the interest, the art appreciation from the ground up, rather than at the top frothy levels?
Well, I think it's important that you ask this. I think it sort of plays out from these collaborative initiatives that are really trying to ensure that these smaller enterprises, these smaller cultural organizations survive. And I suppose the question is, how do we all care about ethical sourcing and sustainability of industries across the board. But within the art world, how do we take responsibility for the environments around us, including the art market? And I mean, that comes with sustained conversation and understanding of the impact that our investments have. So beyond the asset that we acquire when we invest in a work of art, what else are we investing in around the sort of making of that work? And I think that these sort of moments of collaboration are really lending, and I think are the way forward as I hope we emerge from this pandemic.
One more question for you, Zain. So we will talk about sustainability a lot, sustainability regarding the environment and all those things which are happening around us. But in terms of sustainability of the art market, of sustainability of actually keeping the market growing, what do you think is the best way to support these smaller players, these cultural institutions that you mentioned? If you're just an ordinary collector or buyer, is it just to keep patronizing these organizations?
I think patronage takes so many different forms. I mean, one of them, of course, is, investing financially in work, but the others are, supporting a residency of an artist, supporting the research of an artist, supporting the visibility of an artist. That's what many foundations are doing. And I think that sustainability is going to take many different forms within the art world as we go forward. I mean, it's really quite soon to say, but, looking at the way art fairs have fallen apart in the last year, I wonder how many of them will be able to continue when this period is over. And I think we're really rethinking what it means to be shipping artwork around the world, over and over again, and what that means for our carbon footprint within the art world, what the true necessity of that is. I think the necessity to be together and to form conversations in person, and the sort of the alchemy of that has always been and will always be incredibly important to the art world. But we have to rethink the structures we haven't had time to break up till now, and it'll be interesting to see what emerges.
Ishrat, do you have any comments about sustainability of the market from your point of view?
Yes, thank you. So I had a slightly different take on your question about froth, because I think it's really important to understand that what happened post the financial crisis in the end of 2008, the art market had just astronomically expanded to a point where artworks were doubling in value from one day to the next. That is not happening now. So, at that time, there was this bubble, and the bubble burst, and the market really, really suffered and crashed. I don't think the same thing is happening now. Even though the market is strong and growing the way it did before, it's in a more sustainable, slower, steadier way. And so, just to answer your question about what can we do to ensure that doesn't happen, I think already people are being more considered about the way that they are helping to grow this market, and they are just not into this buying frenzy that happened pre the 2008 crash. And then also with regards to your idea of how do we sustain this and how do we keep this going, now might be a very interesting time for everyone to give their viewpoints on how the art world has changed post the pandemic and how these new habits and these new ways of navigating this world can then now keep going. And the way that we can keep sustaining it is by constantly changing and evolving to support this world and the way that we navigate it.
Ishrat, if I may, Rosalind, I just want to add a little more dimension to what Ishrat mentioned. I'm going to dial back the clock a little, if I may. You spoke of the crash. Let's understand what led to that point of the crash leading to this bubble bursting. You know, between 2004 to about 2007, there were several opportunistic vehicles which were purely, investment oriented. And this capital was pumped into the market in a very, very short window. Wherein you saw these numbers explode. You speak of artists' values doubling. We have on record, contemporary artists going from, $5,000 to $125,000 in the span of, 15 months. Now, when someone comes in with just the pure intent of making money of the market, it is going to play havoc eventually. So patronage is something that needs to be considered very carefully. You know, the hand-holding that is required in building a collector's interest, I think, advisors like Zain and several others within the ecosystem are playing that role. I think that aspect has to very carefully be considered. Has the market grown? Yes, absolutely. If you look at some of the moderns and the pre-moderns, there's tremendous growth stories. Look at Sousa's market. FN Sousa went from a turnover of 69 to 159.7 million. That's a massive growth story. That's happened because there is a body of collectors who very strongly and passionately admire this person's work. Obviously, there's an aspect of perhaps behind the scenes understanding that value is rising and it's a good idea for us to quote unquote invest. But by way of doing so, they're also offering tremendous cultural patronage to the ecosystem, which is what one needs. So I think what is very important in order to keep the market sustained and growing is to make sure that it's not just pure capital growth that you're chasing. Investment, I think, has two very clear facets. There's capital generation and there's wealth preservation. In the Indian context, wealth preservation is going to be extremely crucial. What happened between 2004 and 2007 was you had several $1 million, hundreds of millions of dollars being squandered because the wealth was not carefully deployed. It was deployed without any measure, without any understanding of how the market operates and what the bearings of quality are. Any average, excuse my language here, but absolute rubbish was selling for obscene sums of money only because there was a signature that was being chased. That context is going to be very important. So for us to have a sustainable, healthy ecosystem, I think all of us as part of the fraternity have that responsibility. And if we do so carefully, then over the next couple of decades, we're going to see our markets. We speak of the Art Basel report that's just come out. India doesn't even have a mention in that, except for the number of billionaires within the bracket. That's $50 billion turnover. Our contribution to that is 102 million. So we are a dot, but to me that's promising. There's huge opportunity, but we have to be patient. We have to be driven by integrity, and we have to keep that larger picture in mind.
So it seems to me that what you're all saying is right now the situation is different because people are actually more considered. They're getting a better grounding and education in what is a good way to invest in art, right? So would any of you categorize what is currently happening in the art market as a bubble, or are there concerns of a bubble forming this time around?
I'm not an economist, so I really don't know what the economic definition would be. I just, and I see Ashwin has posted a question as well about what does the panel think of the current bubble?
That's what I was trying to sort of paraphrase the question.
The bubble. Ashwin, thanks for your question. Yeah, like I said, like a bubble is something that very rapidly expands and then poof. So, literally talking about the definition of an actual bubble, I don't think that it's suddenly rapidly, I mean, I know Ashwin's posted some stats about how many crores the sale has made in 2020 and then now in this season. But what's important to understand is so for example, take one artist, Maqbool Fida Hussain, his price achieved for an artwork last year is not suddenly expanded very rapidly and is worth now double or triple from one sale season to the next. We're just seeing a really, really large, wide-reaching base of new collectors coming in, more people getting comfortable buying online. So, you know, that's what's important to understand. It's not a particular artist or artwork that's suddenly rapidly expanding and growing into a bubble. It's a very wide-reaching community of collectors that are helping this market get stronger.
Speaking about a new community of collectors, I'd like to ask a question from our audience, which is basically, this is from a young collector. And they're saying it's fascinating there's been a rise in millennial collectors globally. Have you seen this phenomenon rising in the South Asian market? Can I pose that first to Zain?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what's driving the market now are millennial and even Gen Z, which I barely even understand what that is, but Gen Z collectors. And I think what you're seeing is a sort of second generation within a family that are beginning to collect, but collect their way, and are really sort of driving us forward and driving the sort of intelligence and the sort of multifaceted way of supporting the arts forward. I think in terms of a bubble, they were also much more able to navigate the digital realm that we all now exist within at this time and will probably continue, and are sort of better editors of all the sort of material and information that's thrown at them. Because I think that's, it's interesting to hear, and I know that at least through recent auctions, a lot of, and the elephant in the room, which I'm sure we'll get to later, NFTs, the auction houses are seeing a really interesting new wealth of bidders. But I think that for the gallery world, which I'm much more involved in, it is a really difficult time to cultivate new relationships and new clients, because that interface, that personal interface, obviously is missing, is sort of a catalyst needed to convert conversations. But I think absolutely, we are a very young population generally in Asia, across the Middle East, South Asia, where I'm more active, and these are conversations that are really easy to convert, and people who are ready to make decisions now, and are young and have homes and are still building, who haven't already filled their sort of environment over the years. Now is the time to grow.
Ishrat, are you seeing the same in the auction side of things?
So just to first answer your question about a younger demographic, yes. I think last year, 50% of our buyers and bidders were 40 or under. So we are definitely seeing an increase in participation from a younger audience. And then, so yes, basically what's happening is everyone is having to revert to a very low touch model of selling art, less travel, less seeing in person, less handling. So obviously the galleries, the younger galleries who operate on a very high touch model, like Zain said, they need to have face-to-face meetings, interactions, build and gain trust. For, if you're young and you're a new collector, you want to see the works. Arvind had made a very good point, in our last meeting about how, if you are a collector and you've been buying a particular artist's work for a long time, you might not need to see it in person because you know what that artist's work is already like. You're more comfortable buying off of digital. Whereas if it's the first time you're interacting with a brand new artist and you don't really know their work, you do want more of a high touch model. So I think the way forward would be to find a middle ground, because I don't know if there's going to be another pandemic. You know, we can't just rely on the fact that one day this will be over. It might not be, or another one might come. So, you know, the way that the younger market, I feel, has to grow and move forward is finding middle ground with this low touch model, but also, you know, but Zain will have more insights because she's the one who had to operate this way, right? Last year during the pandemic.
Well, I suppose I'm like one of the older generation who's just been traipsing around the world, looking at it all, you know, in person. And I think a lot of advisors will agree, especially if you're working with collectors in different parts of the world, you know, a lot of it is through, you know, digital imagery. And so they've seen the work, but they trust that you've seen it in person, and they trust that you know the source, they trust the condition, and you know, they gain confidence through having you by their side through the process. So, you know, it's not new to be working through PDFs and working digitally, but obviously not being this low touch element extracts a lot of the the immediacy out of it.
Thank you, Zain. There's a question we received from Nikita Jabari, and I'm going to paraphrase. Essentially, they're saying that the middle contemporary segment in South Asian art has suffered and not really recovered from the 2008 crash. And they want to know what will help the recovery of the middle contemporary segment. I'm wondering whether Arvind might be able to talk a bit to that.
Yes, Rosalind,
yeah.
I can.
I'll repeat the question. The question was from Nikita Jabari, and they were asking essentially what will help the recovery of the middle contemporary segment in South Asian art. This question is saying that the master's end, the high end, has been setting records and growing very strongly, but the middle contemporary market has not really recovered since 2008, or has recovered much slower. What do you feel about that, and how do you think that the recovery can be aided?
Well, you know, if I were to be entirely upfront, I would say a number of careers, unfortunately, have been ravaged in that bracket to a point of, you know, no return. The manner in which we saw price escalation for about, I would say, about 55 names within this bracket. It was fabulous while it was happening, but it was all being channeled through this capital that, while enormous in scope, was very limited in its availability. It was all purely directed at a quick turnaround. You know, most art funds that were announced during this window came through with a holding period of about 3 years. You know, in 36 months, you were expecting a market like the most aggressive art fund of the lot actually assured investors 100% returns over a 3-year window. You know, so they were very quick in taking money, but they were, you know, there was no plan of action of cultivating new collectors to whom this could be sold, so that there was a play forward. So the manner in which we saw the price rise for, you know, this 48 to 49 names was so meteoric that in the slump that followed, which was disastrous, like I told you about how we went from $100 million to $35 million, you know, in a span of 8 months. I don't think there's a path to recovery really for at least, you know, 35 out of the 50, 60 names that we have. For some who have a degree of stability by way of international promotion, like some of these artists have very powerful galleries in the international context who support them, on whose program their names rest. You know, they've sailed through. I think it'll just come down to burying their nose, you know, in their studios, trying to sort of reinvent themselves. Obviously, it's easier said than done, but I think it will come down to the quality of art that one sees. You know, I mean, most of them are cerebral. We've seen, you know, quality work come through, though, even in regard of the content that they were creating during that, you know, during the heyday, so to speak. A lot of it was very average. You know, it was very mediocre content. So if there is the promise of you know, quality coming back into the equation, and being able to capture the imagination of particularly the younger collectors on the horizon, I think there is huge value. Just also, I'd like to mention, you know, the previous question that was being discussed about millennial collectors. in 2020, our advisory arm received about 100 new conversations, which were started. I would average about 40% were from what would be regarded as young collectors. I'm actually reaching you all from cafe. It's a makeshift studio that I've created in the cafeteria outside Pokhara in Nepal, and I'm here, primarily to meet a group of high-profile investors who are all under the age of 50. They all are very interested in understanding how they can sort of start actively participating in the art system. So I'm here to sort of speak to them and try and see if there's some kind of common ground that we can find. As an organization, we've been very focused on speaking to people predominantly of Indian origin, because then there's a sense of belonging and there's a sense of pride. But we don't sort of close doors on any conversations that come our way. But there is tremendous interest from the younger collector profile. If there is exciting work that comes out from these mid-career contemporaries, I think the dots can connect, and we can see definite growth on both sides.
Now, we have had quite a few questions on NFTs. This is obviously something that has grabbed a lot of headlines recently. I wonder if any of our distinguished panelists have particular views on NFTs and how they may or may not help especially the sort of up-and-coming emerging artists, or the artists who are able to really seize some of the opportunities in the contemporary art market, of course, for digital art, but also for physical art, right? Because it's not just digital art that we can use NFTs for. Would anyone like to broach this subject? Maybe Zain?
I mean, of course, it's, and we touched on this before. I think, unfortunately, it's not a fad, and they're here to stay. And I think what we saw last week was a really interesting, the claim was this collector of NFTs has acquired this work in order to share in a virtual museum towards that will be experienced within the metaverse. What I'm more likely to believe is that this is a really extraordinary marketing tool to mainstream Bitcoin, which this guy and all his friends bought for like a cent a piece 10 years ago. And I think that the value here and the interest here for us in the creative industry is to sort of understand that it presents an opportunity for creative people who have been producing work in the sort of abundant, infinite realm of the internet, and suddenly allowing them access to the technology within the sort of art world machine that will allow them to benefit and be remunerated for their work in this sort of attributed provenance. I think it's fascinating. We'll see how it impacts the art world as we know it. But that's my initial view on NFTs. I'm hungry to learn more. It's just a sort of fascinating new looming wave at us, but it's with a sense of skepticism.
Do you think the budding South Asian markets will delve into this NFT market? This is a question from Moksha Kumar. Could this be a potential avenue, and how would this impact the way in which galleries, auction houses and artists would approach art sales? I'm not sure, Ishrat, if you have a view on what Sotheby's might do.
With regards to NFTs?
Correct, yeah.
So Sotheby's are going to be partnering with PAC, and we are also going to be having an auction that's going to sort of bridge this gap between the auction world and NFTs, and we're going to be entering this new sphere. So watch out. Keep your eyes.
You can't tell us a little bit more about it right now?
No, not right now. But more information will come out. But yes, the auction world is very much interested in understanding this new venture, this new way of purchasing, this new way of tagging, this whole digital sphere. So, you know, it's not like Zain said, it's not just one passing fad, one artwork that's made a very high price. People are sitting up and taking notice, and we'll see how this plays out.
Well, if I can also just add, I mean, the other fascinating thing about this most recent sale and the people who feel most confident about NFTs is it's bringing to the fore a whole new realm of new collectors. I think the bids on that work were 90% new clients to Christie's, and the majority of them very young. So see how it affects the rest of us.
But also, you know, it's interesting, Zain, you mentioned that, because apparently most of the bidders, underbidders on that one work are people who work in this market. They, you know, they have companies that deal with NFTs. They understand it. It's so in the same way that a lot of South Asians buy South Asian art, a lot of people working in this digital world are supporting and understand this new digital art better, if that makes sense.
And are invested in this economy and this currency proliferating and becoming a sort of universal one. I mean, there is that element. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, so it's you know, my take on this is I personally, in a personal capacity, you know, like to hop onto new vehicles. When Bitcoin came along, I was one of the early movers in it. But when it comes to, you know, here we're working with clients' capital. You know, we're working with representing interest and order, and one has to be a little cautious. While I'm very excited about it and the prospect and the probability of where this might lead, I'm in no hurry to jump on the bandwagon right just yet. You know, let's let the dust settle a bit. Let's understand. I'm certain it's not a fad. You know, I'll go to the extent of putting that on record. I think this is here to stay, and I think a large number of these young collectors that we speak of, they're going to drive this wagon forward very, very clearly. But the ramifications of it, and you know, the scope and the potential of it, I think that as an agency, as an outfit that represents clients, you know, and is perhaps buying on their behalf, I wouldn't be in a hurry to sort of take a sort of financial decision right just yet.
I think we've touched on a really hot topic here, because there are a lot of questions coming in about NFTs, which we don't actually have time to cover. We need at least another 45 minutes to cover all of them. But for now, I just want to say,
Roz, that could be the subject of your new panel. Get some experts on NFTs to answer all the questions.
Yes, I'll try and get Beeple next time and see whether he's going to respond. I have to wrap this up right now, I'm afraid. But I hope this has been an interesting discussion and sparked a lot of questions, which is always great for any kind of panel, because it means that we've sort of piqued people's interest, which I think is great. I want to thank our panelists today, Ishrat Kanga from Sotheby's, Arvind, the CEO of Artery India, and also Zain Masud, art advisor and strategist, and also, of course, the Asia Society India Center for this, and also, of course, my colleagues here at Bloomberg for helping to host this panel discussion. For those of you who are attending the private meeting hosted by Bloomberg, please log in via your unique links, which you should have received from the Asia Society. And thank you all for coming today, and we'll look forward to talking to you again.